Howdy everybody. Um, this is Northwest Resilience and I am Nathan Donnelly and I'm doing a video on episode 6 of season 6 of the Alone show on the History Channel, of which I was a participant. I have been doing kind of a backstory of all of the episodes, and I'm up to episode 6 now. I'll be doing 7, 8, 9, and I already have 10 out, and all the other previous ones are already done as well. So if you like to see into my head a little bit, get a little bit more insight into how the show was done, what my own personal experience was, and things that I've noticed about other participants' experience out there, their environment, maybe what was going through their head, and all that, then check out my other videos. I have some pretty good stuff on there. I'm also doing disaster preparedness presentations that are already up, and in the future I'll be doing more on survival, bushcrafting, permaculture, direct living skills of all kinds, and also the soft skills of survival, kind of the mental headspace and tactics and things that I think about when I'm in it for the long haul. I'm gonna get a little fire going here, but going through, I just watched episode 6 and took a bunch of notes, and just kind of want to go through the thought process with you while I get this fire going here. And episode 6 starts out, I think, somewhere around day 26 or 27, and they start out with talking to Nikki, or with Nikki starting out, and she immediately shows a picture of her thumb and how mangy looking it is, and that she's going to do something about it and give herself a manicure. I had the exact same issue when I was out there. I got a split in the end of my thumb, exactly where she did, and it took me over a month to heal it up. The air up there was cold and dry, and we were dealing with things like, cleaning fish and gutting animals, where you had to kind of like wash your hands off, and half the time what we had to wash our hands off with was snow or very cold lake water, and we were working, we were doing woodwork, carving, axe work, saw work, whatever, handling firewood at all times. And most of that time we probably had gloves on, especially later on, because it was so darn cold out there, but it still was really, really hard on the hands. And I noticed my own hands seemed to go through like 3 different incarnations of getting tougher and more adapted to the cold. I work, outdoors full time already here in Washington, but I don't deal with that kind of cold, and I could feel my hands like every night throbbing, because they were changing to the environment. They were changing to the activity they'd been through that day, and my hands actually were able to stay warmer and got tougher over time out there. So it was a really weird thing to watch your body evolve, in real time, to meet the environment. So Nikki's talking about going through some highs and lows, and how she's feeling really positive about how she's bouncing back from the lows. She's just got a really good control of her headspace. Nikki lives closer to me than I think anybody else who is on the show in season 6, just to the north, on another small island. And she lives in a cabin she built herself out in the wilderness, and she is really accustomed to brain maintenance, I guess, or heart maintenance, or whatever you want to call it. But the idea of being out in the wilderness without, the help from other people is not a foreign thing to her. And I know it was one of my strengths as well. So she's rolling with the punches. One thing happens, she gets cut, she gets a little stab in the back of her leg, her shelter catches on fire. That's the next thing that happens. She's just giving herself a manicure, talking about how well she's bouncing back from things, healing well from her injuries, and sitting in front of the fire, and all of a sudden you see her look up, and oh my God, the ceiling of her shelter is on fire. She had a fire with a bunch of poles oriented vertically behind the fire, and I think some probably moss chinking in there as well. And it looked safe. I mean, it was a full 2 feet, 3 feet, maybe even back from the flames. Um, but I talked about this with Michelle's fire in a previous episode. When there's a fire indoors like that and it's not all going up through a chimney, or even if it is, that's how chimney fires are caused. Creosote builds up on everything, and it puts this flammable, fuzzy, black surface on everything that the lightest spark can land into, and then it's game over, or it's ablaze. And her fire seemed to, in seconds, engulf several square feet of the back wall or the ceiling near her thing. And she handles it, man. She freaking rips the wall down on her shelter where it's barehanded, where it's burning, and ends up putting the fire out. And super impressive thing to happen in the middle of the night, kind of like with Michelle, and she deals with it and bounces back really, really well. But something like that takes its toll. It takes, she says it's going to take her 2 or 3 days to bounce back from that. Shelter building up there, my own personal experience was, it was drawn out. The materials up there are not very good. The poles are pretty beautiful, but if you're going to be building with boughs, which is what I did primarily, this shelter that I've got started here for one of the survival classes I teach, actually done by some of the kids that I'm teaching. You can do something like this out here in half an hour, and you can finish it in 3 hours. Up there, it's going to take you 3 days to do something like this, because you have to fall tree after tree to get the most measly little branches off of them and come up with some kind of a shingling material. And if you've ever worked with spruce boughs, the needles come out in a bottle brush all the way around. They're the worst shingling material in the world. They're not so bad for insulation, but for what I was trying to use them for, not good. So yeah, she bounces back. Really impressed with her. Cuts to Michelle. She's having trouble sleeping, and apparently there was a storm that night. She goes out to check Swamp Grass Susie, her kind of fishing rig that she made out of that huge barrel, and it is a shambles on the shoreline. The storm broke it apart all over her shoreline. She's got the barrel still, she's got all the poles, but all the parts are unbuilt now. So that was kind of a little bit of a letdown. And so her fishing game kind of gets knocked out. She wasn't able to bring her bow and arrows. Michelle was planning on doing archery while she was out there, and unfortunately, she had some issue with, I think, her broadheads coming loose or something on her arrows. I can't remember exactly what it was, but pretty much last minute, the day before, 2 days before we ended up going out there, she ended up having to make the decision to not bring her archery equipment because it wasn't performing. And she had big game on her place. So there's some really good footage of a moose walking right over the front, over the top of where she walks just moments later. She had moose on her place, and I don't know that anybody else did besides Jordan. I don't remember seeing footage. The footage that they have of me with a moose walking through my camp early on there is actually, Michelle believes, some of her footage from her game cam, but that wasn't footage of my moose. So I didn't have any big game at that point in the game near my near my camp. And yeah, I don't recall anybody else's footage having any either. So it might have just been Michelle and Jordan that even had a chance at taking a large animal. So hunting's out, fishing is out at that time. She decides to go out and check her traps. She is a good trapper. She grew up in Saskatchewan. She traps food to put it on the table at her home for her family now. She's really good at it. She's a guide in a cold northern place, so she's got that experience. While she's out trapping or checking her traps, walking around, she gets lightheaded enough to take a knee, basically, if not actually stumble a little bit. that was really the second time I saw that. That was really concerning to me because I got lightheaded enough to go down, but it was always after I stood up. It was always a blood pressure thing, like when you stand up real fast, you ooh, she was walking around normally, and it took her down. So that is concerning to me to get lightheaded like that all of a sudden. They cut to Nikki next, and it's the next morning after her fire, and she's out front laughing about her episode the night before, about her fire. Like, it was totally a scary thing. Again, like, this is Nikki freaking bouncing back. She's a rubber ball. I mean, she had this pretty traumatic event happen to her house in the middle of the night in the middle of the Arctic. And the next day she's laughing about it and working on it. She deals with it. I'm really freaking impressed by that. She, not only that, but she comes up with a plan to keep it from happening again. She's going to clean off the logs. She's going to use a different material for chinking, and she's going to, every 5 days she says she's going to knock that creosote off and, do a chimney clean, basically. Like, effective action, effective plans, positive attitude. I mean, freaking impressed by her. Yeah, she's just as resilient as they come. But that whole episode, it does set her back 2 or 3 days. That's a lot of work to rebuild a corner of your shelter. It's just a lot of work in general to be out there. Cuts to Brady on day 28. Brady is cooking like a fish fillet like this, probably from a lake trout, I'm guessing, in a pan that's like this. He finds this really sweet sheet iron frying pan out there. I have the same one that I cook on at home all the time, except I think his is even bigger. He finds it on the beach out there somewhere. That was a freaking score, especially for the size of the fish that we were catching out there. That'd be a really cool thing. He has a really good breakfast of that fillet, and then starts thinking about how much he misses his family, misses his wife, and his kids. He's got 4 kids. The guy is a family man. He's like a family man first and foremost. It's what he lives for, and he misses his kids a lot. And I to contrast like my situation where I live here, I live alone. I have a girlfriend, but she lives on another island, so I only get to see her once or twice a week. And I have a lot of time to myself. I'm used to that. I have a quiet home, which is what I like. And to go from the contrast in environments that he did, where he's got 4 young kids running around having fun, a kid or an amazing wife, kids reading stories to him at night, to go from that to into the Arctic all alone, where there's I guess one lone fox. The History Channel does a little 2-minute kind of vignette on YouTube of him and this experience he's having with a fox out there. That's a heck of an adjustment. And even for me, I planned for that adjustment myself. I was worried about that, even though I already do like peace and quiet plenty well enough. I stopped listening to the radio for 6 months before I went out there. I stopped going on the internet unless I was doing some research for the show. I did not spend time engaging with media. I didn't watch television except for the Alone show and documentaries that had to do with northern survival in some way, shape, or form. And that's what I did to adjust myself to that. Brady has a busy family. He works in the military with a lot of other people, and when he's on deployment, he's got one movie after the other he can see anytime he wants. And I should have built this a little better, but yeah, he is. He's not in the environment he's used to at home. And it's those subtle things that get you out there. It's those little things that you don't think about, they don't talk about in survival training. You don't find YouTube videos on, how to be alone for an entire month, which is how long he was out there towards the end. You don't learn about stuff like that. It's those soft skills that I think are vitally important that you just don't hear about. You don't find you don't find information on. And that's something that I want to teach a lot more of. If you're interested in that, please contact me. I'm really drawn to bring that more to the survival teaching community, is the importance of understanding. We all fall back on positive mental attitude. That's kind of like the thing that everybody says, but they don't talk anything more about that. And quite frankly, I don't think that positive mental attitude is the end all be all. I don't think it's actually possible. I think that's a little bit of a denial to think that, somehow you get yourself into a survival situation. Maybe you flipped your car end over end 3 times and your spouse is next to you dead and you still have to survive. You're not going to have a positive mental attitude in that situation. Maybe there was a 9.0 earthquake in your community, which is completely possible where I live, and half of their village is leveled. You're not going to have a positive mental attitude at that time. But you still have to act on behalf of yourself and on behalf of the others. And hopefully you've done the work beforehand to be in a position where you can be a resource and not a liability for yourself and for your community. So, yeah, Brady's feeling it. He's getting bored. He misses his family. It's totally understandable. It was definitely the hardest thing for me, and I didn't have anywhere near the amount of transition that he was going through. So it's understandable. Barry is next, and they cut to him making his sign for Camp Swift Victory, which he has hanging above his shelter for the duration of his time out there. And I thought that was kind of funny because it meant he was pretty certain all the rest of us were going to disappear before he did, and do it swiftly. But he's trying to keep a positive attitude, and he's got, if you look inside of his shelter, he's got stuff written on the inside of his walls to kind of keep him focused and keep him paying attention to the things that matter. And I did exactly the same thing. I had 2 different signs that I made, where one of them I took my time. I cut a log up, I hewed one whole flat side off of it so there was nice white wood underneath it, and I wrote on it. I haven't seen it on the show yet. I don't know if they ever pop up, but I did another one where I took a log that was white birch bark and I carved letters into the bark so it had that deep red relief underneath it. And those were super meaningful to me. I put those right where my eyes would be looking at them first thing in the morning every day, or if I was walking out of my shelter, it was the last thing I would see before I went outside. They were meaningful to have that, to keep the mind focused on the job at hand and not off thinking about what's good at home and all these things that are 2,000 miles away. You need to be in there, and I'm really appreciated that Barry was doing the same thing. He is feeling pretty rough. He does actually do kind of a YMCA dance style victory dance, and then he acknowledges that he's been feeling pretty rough. He's been really lethargic. He's been getting cramps, and finally the show kind of acknowledges underneath his talk there, and the little lettering they do there, that lack of electrolytes will do that to you. That's what hyponatremia is, when you get low in sodium and other electrolytes. Your body goes out of balance, and I have every reason to believe that's what Michelle was going through. That's why she was getting lightheaded, first off, and why Barry was getting his cramps and feeling lethargic, and why I was blacking out and stumbling around as well until I got salt in me. I noticed his teeth are still blue, so he's been eating obviously a lot of those crowberries, which are diuretic and will cause you to lose a lot more of those electrolytes through your urine. So I feel pretty strongly that's what's been happening in our season 5 and season 3 in Patagonia. Those were all 3 seasons where that was really common, and there was no salt water on hand. We weren't on the ocean in any of those seasons in Patagonia, Mongolia, and Great Slave Lake. Barry ends up snaring a hare. I forgot that he had done any trapping out there until I rewatched this, but he made a snare, I think, out of parachute cord, and processes it like a pro. Looks really good, and talks about how he's got an attitude of gratitude. He's extremely grateful for this animal and that little bit of abundance it gives him. So he's showing gratitude, and he is also, I can't remember what he does, but he does something really funny there, but he's being really humorous. Those are two things that I really look for when I'm watching the show. If I'm trying to pick who's going to go the distance, it's the people that when things are grinding down, they're still bringing themselves back around to gratitude. They're still finding good things in the world, and they're generally doing something that's kind of funny. I think of season one, Sam and Alan, two funniest bastards on the planet, right? And they stay that way through the end. That's something as a fan, if you're trying to look at like who's going to have staying power. Look at that before you look at how many years has this person lived in the wilderness, or da da da, how big are they, what all these other things are. That mindset is pretty clutch. You look at Nicola Palian too, like she lasted, I don't know, about 2 months in season 2. That woman is beaming all the time. I have never seen her not beaming, other than when she was really sad about the loss of her son, which anybody's going to be bummed out about. But that's a thing. That's a thing. Positive mental attitude isn't necessarily the same thing, but recognizing that even though life is hard, you still have good things going on is what keeps this thing maintained up here. Yeah, he's in a good headspace. Then he's in his shelter at night, and he hears an animal outside. He's pretty certain it's a bear. He can kind of hear some snuffling or kind of growling noises, definitely crunching in the snow of some footprints. And I don't know that he ever gets eyes on it. It sounds like he doesn't, but he has got his bow at the ready, and he's thinking about what he needs to do. This animal is clawing at the corners of his shelter, or the edges of his shelter, and he's ready to let arrows fly. And then he remembers that we went out there with bear bangers, which are kind of a self-defense device from primarily bears, but I guess they'd work in just about any animal. It's basically a mini flare, and we got this little device about the size of a marker that you loaded up a firework kind of thing up to, and it had a little trigger on it. You deployed the trigger, and this thing would shoot up in the air, maybe 100, 150 feet, and then explode. And then scare the heck out of anything, because it's a super bright light at night, and it's a big, loud bang. It's pretty impressive, and I would definitely be scared by it. So he shoots one of those out of the top of his kind of teepee-shaped lavu shelter there, and the animal immediately takes off. Next morning, he gets out there at first light to do some tracking and come up with a plan to potentially draw this animal in to where he can take a shot at it. He is thinking about a bear blanket to sleep on and a lot of meat, and he's not afraid of this thing. He's like, I'm gonna eat you, and that's kind of the same mentality I had out there. If I could have drawn a bear to somewhere where I had it in a shooting lane from my shelter, I would have done it for sure. And he just got that hair, so he has got the hide that he tore off of it, and probably some of the guts and everything, basically the carcass, and he kind of bundles it up into some branches. It'd be hard to get at it, but he can still deploy it, puts it under some rocks with his tin cans on top of it to make a racket, so when something starts digging around at it, he'll hear it and be ready for action. Kind of a cool plan. He says if this all works, it'll be the Hillbilly Hall. He'll go in the Hillbilly Hall of Fame. But they never did show the tracks. So the one thing, there's something that just didn't quite feel right to me about that animal out there being a bear. And I can't remember what it was exactly, but I remember when I first saw it, I was leaning more towards Wolverine. And that might just be because that's what, Wolverines are everywhere out there. And they're nocturnal, they move quick, but they're kind of like shuffling and loud like a bear. And they never did see his tracks when he went out tracking the next day. And I'm wondering if that wasn't actually a Wolverine that had been out the night before. Still another amazing animal to get one of. But yeah, they didn't edit it anyway, so I think they were maybe trying to make it seem a little more scary than it might have been. But I wasn't there, so I don't know. Then view changes to my camp, Nathan in big letters at the head of my bay, and I noticed that the head of my bay at this point is frozen, and the ice is beginning to build up, which I talk about a little later on, and then it comes to my inner shelter. I finally start construction on my raised platform.